The fire had stolen more than Victoria Wright's home that night. In 1882, it had carved a map of agony across her skin that she believed made her unlovable forever. She stood behind the counter of the Aurora, Colorado General Store, her high-necked dress buttoned to her chin despite the summer heat, long sleeves covering arms that bore the twisted pink and white evidence of flames that had consumed her family's farmhouse 3 years ago. At 22, Victoria had learned to move through life like a shadow, keeping her gaze down, her body covered, her heart locked away where no one could see the scars that ran deeper than skin. The physical marks extended from her left shoulder, down her arm, across part of her chest, and up the left side of her neck, a constant reminder of the night she had pulled her younger brother from the burning house before the roof collapsed. He had survived without a mark. She had survived as something she considered broken. The bell above the door chimed, and Victoria glanced up briefly before returning her attention to the inventory ledger. She had become expert at these quick, dismissive looks that discourage conversation beyond the transactional. But the man who entered didn't approach the counter immediately. Instead, she heard his boots against the wooden floor, a measured pace that suggested someone taking in his surroundings, rather than rushing through an errand. "Excuse me, madam." The voice was deep, polite, with the slight drawl of someone who had spent years under open skies. Victoria looked up, and her breath caught despite her best efforts to remain unmoved. The cowboy stood tall, perhaps 6 feet, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed a trim. But it was his eyes that arrested her, a warm brown that held neither pity nor judgment, just an honest directness that made her want to look away and keep looking all at once. "I need supplies for a 2-week trip north," he said, pulling a list from his vest pocket. "My name is Thomas Tucker, just hired on at the Crawford Ranch, and they sent me to stock up before we move the herd." "I can help you with that," Victoria said quietly, taking the list with her right hand while keeping her left side angled away. She scanned the items: coffee, beans, flour, salt pork, ammunition. Standard fare for a cattle drive. "It will take me a few minutes to gather everything." "No rush," Thomas said, leaning against the counter with an ease that suggested he found comfort wherever he happened to be. "Just got into town yesterday. Still getting my bearings." Victoria moved through the store, pulling items from shelves and barrels, acutely aware of his presence. Most customers either stared at what they could see of her scars or made such an obvious effort not to look that it became its own form of attention. Thomas simply watched her work with what seemed like genuine interest in her efficiency. "You know your way around this place," he observed as she calculated weights and measurements without hesitation. "I have worked here for 2 years," Victoria replied, keeping her responses brief. She had learned that conversation led to questions, and questions led to sympathy or disgust, 2 sides of the same coin that left her feeling equally diminished. "You are good at it," Thomas said. "I have been in a lot of general stores from Texas to Montana. Most folks either give you too much or not enough, then argue about the price. You move like you know exactly what you are doing." Despite herself, Victoria felt a small warmth kindle in her chest. Compliments on her work were rare. Most people who knew her story seemed to think her competence was somehow surprising or inspirational, which felt worse than no recognition at all. Thomas spoke as if he were simply stating a fact. She totaled his order and wrapped the goods in brown paper, tying each bundle with practiced precision. "That will be $8.40. Thomas counted out the money, his hands rough and scarred from work. Victoria noticed a particularly nasty scar across his right knuckles, the kind that came from a serious injury, perhaps a rope burn or a cut that had needed stitching. "Thank you, miss." He paused, realizing she had not introduced herself. "Wright. Victoria Wright." "Miss Wright," he repeated, as if trying out the sound of it. "I appreciate your help. I imagine I will be back before we head out. Always forget something on these trips." Victoria nodded, already turning back to her ledger, her signal that the transaction had concluded, but she found herself glancing toward the door after he left, watching through the window as Thomas loaded his supplies onto a sturdy buckskin horse and rode down Main Street toward the Crawford spread. The rest of the day passed in its usual rhythm. Mrs. Henderson came in for fabric and spent 20 minutes discussing the upcoming church social that Victoria would not attend. Mr. Chen, who ran the laundry, purchased soap and discussed the weather. Young Billy Morrison bought penny candy and barely looked at her, his child's acceptance of her appearance the closest thing to normalcy she experienced. That evening, Victoria climbed the stairs to her small room above the store. The owner, Mr. Pearson, had offered her the space 2 years ago when she had needed work and housing. It was sparse but clean, a narrow bed, a washstand, a trunk for her clothes, and a small table by the window where she sometimes sat and watched the town settle into night. She undressed carefully, avoiding the mirror as she always did, and washed with cool water from the basin. The scars pulled tight in the heat, a constant physical reminder that served as reinforcement for the emotional walls she had built. Her younger brother Daniel had left Colorado last year, heading to California where he hoped to start fresh. He had begged her to come, but Victoria could not imagine presenting herself in a new place, explaining her story to new people, seeing the same reactions paint different faces. Here, at least, people knew. They had moved past shock to a kind of settled discomfort that allowed her to exist on the margins of community life without constant explanation. She lay in bed, listening to the sounds of Aurora settling for the night piano, music from the saloon, laughter from the hotel restaurant, the occasional horse and rider passing through. And despite her best efforts to dismiss it, she found herself thinking about Thomas Tucker's warm brown eyes and the way he had spoken to her, as if she were simply a person doing a job, nothing more or less. It meant nothing, she told herself firmly. He was just passing through, another cowboy in a territory full of them. By this time next week, he would be gone with the Crawford herd, and she would return to her careful, contained existence. But sleep was slow in coming, and when it finally arrived, she dreamed of open spaces and a voice calling her name without hesitation or pity. The next 3 days passed without incident. Victoria fell into her familiar routines, opening the store at dawn, managing inventory, serving customers with quiet efficiency, closing up as the sun set over the mountains. She told herself she was not watching for anyone in particular, but her gaze lifted more frequently to the door, and she felt a distinct disappointment each time it was not Thomas Tucker who entered. On the 4th day, he returned. Victoria was restocking shelves when the bell chimed, and she turned to find Thomas surveying the store with that same observant attention he had brought to his first visit. "Miss Wright," he said, tipping his hat. "Told you I would forget something." "What do you need?" Victoria asked, climbing down from the step stool she had been using. "Coffee," Thomas said. "Bought plenty of beans, but forgot the coffee grinder broke last month. Also could use another canteen. Lost mine somewhere between here and the ranch." Victoria gathered the items, trying to ignore the way her pulse had quickened. It was merely surprise at seeing him again, she told herself. Nothing more. "You settling in well at the Crawford place?" she asked, then immediately regretted the question. She did not make small talk. Small talk led to familiarity, and familiarity led to hurt. But Thomas did not seem to notice her internal discomfort. "Well enough, they run a good operation. The foreman is strict but fair, and the other hands know their business, different from some places I have worked." "You have worked many places?" The question escaped before Victoria could stop it. Thomas leaned against the counter again, that same relaxed posture that suggested he had nowhere else he needed to be. "Been working cattle since I was 14. Started in Texas on my father's ranch, then headed north when I turned 18. Worked spreads in New Mexico, Wyoming, even spent a season in Montana. Been looking for something more permanent, though. Gets tiring, always moving on." Victoria nodded, carefully wrapping the coffee grinder. "That will be $2.15. Thomas paid, but instead of leaving immediately, he glanced toward the window where afternoon sun streamed through. "It is a fine day out there. You get much chance to enjoy the weather, working inside all the time?" "I manage," Victoria said, her tone cooling. This felt too much like personal interest, and personal interest was dangerous. Thomas must have heard the change in her voice because he straightened, his expression becoming more formal. "Of course, I did not mean to pry. Thank you again, Miss Wright." He left, and Victoria felt an odd mixture of relief and regret. She had successfully maintained her boundaries, but the store seemed dimmer somehow, as if the sun had shifted behind clouds. That evening, Mrs. Henderson's daughter Emma came by just as Victoria was closing up. Emma was 19, pretty, and kind in a way that made Victoria feel both grateful and slightly patronized. "Mother wanted me to invite you to Sunday dinner," Emma said, hovering near the door as if afraid to come too close. "We are having pot roast, and there will be several people there. The new cowboy from the Crawford Ranch is coming too. Thomas Tucker, do you know him?" Victoria's hand stilled on the lock. "He has been in the store. He is very handsome," Emma said with a giggle. "And polite, too. Mother is hoping he might take an interest in me. A good cowboy with steady work would make a fine husband." "I am sure he would," Victoria said evenly, ignoring the unexpected twist in her stomach. "But I cannot come to dinner. Thank you for the invitation." "Oh, but you never come to anything," Emma protested gently. "It would be good for you to socialize more. You cannot spend your whole life hiding away." The words, though likely meant with kindness, struck like a slap. Victoria turned, and Emma's eyes went wide as she seemed to realize what she had said. "I did not mean that I just thought—" "Thank you for the invitation," Victoria repeated, her voice carefully neutral. "Please give your mother my regards." Emma fled, and Victoria locked the door behind her with trembling hands. She climbed to her room and sat by the window, watching the street below as twilight descended. She saw Thomas ride past, heading toward the nicer part of town where the Henderson family lived in a large house with a white picket fence and roses blooming in the yard. Of course he would be interested in Emma. She was exactly the sort of woman a man like Thomas would want, young, pretty, unmarked by tragedy. Victoria had been foolish to let even the smallest warmth kindle in response to his kindness. Kindness was not interest. Politeness was not attraction. She undressed and caught her reflection in the small mirror before she could look away. The scars traced their familiar, terrible paths across her skin, raised and puckered in some places, smooth and discolored in others. She touched her neck where the damage crept above her collar, feeling the tightness of scarred tissue. "No man would want this," she whispered to her reflection. "No man should have to." She turned away and climbed into bed, determined to forget Thomas Tucker and the brief, dangerous flutter of hope he had inspired. But Sunday came, and with it an unexpected turn. Victoria was in her room, reading one of the books she borrowed from the small library when she heard voices on the street below. She glanced out and saw Thomas Tucker standing outside the store, looking up at her window. Her heart hammered as she pulled back, hoping he had not seen her. But a moment later, there was a knock on the exterior stairway door that led to her room. Victoria froze. No one came to her room. The only entrance was the outside stairway, which she used to come and go without walking through the store. For someone to knock on that door meant they specifically sought her private space. The knock came again, patient but persistent. Against her better judgment, Victoria descended the stairs and opened the door a crack, keeping the chain engaged. Thomas stood on the landing, hat in hand. "Miss Wright, I apologize for disturbing you," he said, "but I wanted to speak with you, and I did not think you would appreciate me doing so in the store where others might overhear." "What do you want?" Victoria asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Thomas met her eyes steadily. "I wanted to tell you that I will not be attending the Henderson dinner today, and I wanted you to know it is not because of you." Victoria blinked, confusion overriding caution. "I do not understand. Why would it have anything to do with me?" "Because Mrs. Henderson made it clear that her invitation came with expectations regarding her daughter, and I have no interest in pursuing those expectations. And because Miss Emma mentioned that you had been invited but declined, and I suspect my presence might have been part of your reason for doing so." Heat flooded Victoria's face. "You are mistaken. I never attend social gatherings. Your plans have nothing to do with my decisions." "Maybe so," Thomas said calmly. "But I wanted you to know anyway. I also wanted to ask if you might take a walk with me this afternoon. Just around town, nothing improper. I would like to get to know you better, Miss Wright, if you would allow it." Victoria stared at him, her mind racing. This had to be some kind of joke, or worse, pity. "Why would you want to know me better?" "Because you are interesting," Thomas said simply. "You are competent and intelligent, and I enjoy talking with you. Those seem like good reasons to me." "You do not know anything about me," Victoria said, her hand tightening on the door. "Which is why I would like to spend time with you," Thomas replied. "To learn." "I am not—" Victoria struggled to find words. "I am not the sort of woman men take walks with." Thomas's expression shifted, something like understanding dawning in his eyes. "Miss Wright, I saw your scars the first day we met, the ones on your neck and the way you favor your right side. I am not blind, and I am not asking you to walk with me despite those scars. I am asking because I find you intriguing, and I would like to know you better. The scars are part of your story, but they are not the whole of who you are." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes and fought them back furiously. You should go to the Henderson dinner. Emma is a lovely girl, and she is interested in you. Emma is very nice, Thomas agreed, but I am not interested in her. I am interested in you. If you prefer I leave you alone, I will respect that. But if you are refusing because you think I am only being kind, or because you believe no man could genuinely want your company, then you are wrong, and I would like the chance to prove it. For a long moment, Victoria stood frozen, her carefully constructed walls trembling. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to protect herself from inevitable disappointment. But something in Thomas's steady gaze, in the quiet confidence of his words, made her hesitate. Just a walk, she heard herself say. Nothing more. Thomas's face broke into a smile that transformed his features, revealing a warmth that made Victoria's breath catch. Just a walk. Let me give you a few minutes to get ready, and I will wait here. Victoria closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. What was she doing? This could only end in hurt, but her hands were already moving, smoothing her hair, checking that her high collar was properly fastened, pulling on her gloves to cover as much skin as possible. When she emerged, Thomas was sitting on the top step, looking out over the town. He stood as she appeared and offered his arm. Victoria hesitated, then placed her hand lightly on his sleeve, maintaining careful distance. They walked slowly down Main Street, which was quiet on Sunday afternoon, with most people at church or dinner. Thomas pointed out features of the town, asking questions about Aurora's history and the surrounding area. Victoria found herself responding, her initial stiffness gradually easing as the conversation remained comfortable and neutral. How long have you lived here? Thomas asked as they passed the church, its windows glowing with afternoon sun. 5 years, Victoria said. My family had a farm about 10 miles east. After the fire, I needed work and a place to stay. Mr. Pearson offered both. The fire, Thomas said quietly. That is where the scars came from. It was not a question, but Victoria nodded anyway. The house caught fire in the middle of the night. My younger brother was trapped in his room. I got him out, but the roof collapsed as I was leaving. The doctors said I was lucky to survive. Lucky, Thomas repeated, something bitter in his tone. People say that a lot about survival, as if merely living is enough, regardless of what you live with afterward. Victoria glanced at him sharply. You sound as if you speak from experience. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he stopped walking and turned to face her. May I show you something, Miss Wright? At her uncertain nod, he unbuttoned his left shirt sleeve and rolled it up, revealing his forearm. Victoria gasped. The skin was marked with long, jagged scars that ran from wrist to elbow, the kind that came from deep lacerations. Thomas rolled up his other sleeve, showing similar damage. I was 16, he said quietly. Working a drive in Texas, the herd spooked during a storm, and I got caught in a barbed wire fence. Tore up both arms pretty badly. The doctor said I might lose them, but they healed. Left me with these, though. He rebuttoned his sleeves, his movements careful. I spent a long time thinking I was ruined, that no one would want to hire a cowboy with scarred-up arms, that I would never be able to do the work again. Took me even longer to believe that the scars did not make me less of a person, just a person who had survived something difficult. Victoria felt something crack in her chest, a fissure in the wall she had built so carefully. People can see my scars, she whispered. They look at me, and that is all they see. Some people, Thomas agreed, but not everyone. And Miss Wright, if I may be bold, I think you have started to see yourself the way you fear others see you. You hide yourself away, believing you are doing everyone a favor, when really you are just protecting yourself from the possibility of rejection. Can you blame me? Victoria asked, her voice breaking slightly. I have seen how people look at me, the pity, the disgust, the way they avert their eyes or stare too much. I am a curiosity or a tragedy, nothing more. To some people, maybe, Thomas said, but not to me. When I look at you, I see a woman who saved her brother's life at great cost to herself. I see someone who has built a life despite suffering. I see competence and intelligence and a strength that most people never have to develop. The scars are evidence of what you survived, Miss Wright. They do not diminish you. They prove how remarkable you are. Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks before she could stop them. She turned away mortified, but Thomas gently caught her hand, her left hand, the one that bore the worst of the scarring beneath her glove. "I am sorry," he said softly. "I did not mean to upset you. No one has ever—" Victoria struggled to speak through tears. "No one has ever said anything like that to me. Not my family, not friends. They try to pretend the scars are not there, or they focus on how brave I was, but no one has ever suggested that I could be." She could not finish. "Desirable?" Thomas supplied gently. "Worthy of attention and affection? Beautiful, even with marks that tell a story of courage?" Victoria shook her head helplessly. "I am not beautiful. I know what I look like." "You are beautiful to me," Thomas said, and the simple certainty in his voice made Victoria look up at him through tears. "I understand if you cannot believe that yet, but I would like the chance to prove it to you, if you will let me." They stood there on the quiet street, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders, and Victoria felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in 3 years' hope. It was terrifying and fragile, but it was there, a tiny flame that Thomas's words had kindled. "I do not know how," she whispered. "I do not know how to be the person you seem to think I am." "You just be yourself," Thomas said. "That is enough, more than enough." They walked for another hour, talking about easier things: Thomas's travels, Victoria's memories of her family before the fire, the peculiarities of Aurora's residence. By the time he walked her back to her stairway, Victoria felt exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. "May I call on you again?" Thomas asked. Victoria hesitated, fear and hope warring within her. But the hope won, just barely. "Yes, you may." Thomas smiled that transforming smile again, tipped his hat, and left. Victoria climbed to her room and sat by the window, watching him ride back toward the Crawford ranch. She touched her neck where the scars rose above her collar and allowed herself, for the first time in years, to imagine being touched there with something other than pity or revulsion. The thought terrified her, but it also made her feel more alive than she had in a very long time. The following weeks unfolded in a pattern that became precious to Victoria. Thomas came to town every few days, sometimes on errands for the ranch, sometimes simply to see her. They took walks, sat on the bench outside the store in the evening, and talked about everything and nothing. Victoria learned that Thomas was 25, that his mother had died when he was young, that his father had remarried, and Thomas had left home to give the new family space. She learned that he loved horses, that he had once considered becoming a veterinarian, that he read poetry when he could get his hands on it. Thomas learned that Victoria had wanted to be a teacher, that she loved thunderstorms, that she had a talent for mathematics that made inventory management satisfying. He learned that she had not seen her brother in over a year, that she missed him terribly, that she carried guilt about the night of the fire despite saving his life. "He wrote me once," Victoria told Thomas one evening as they sat outside the store, watching the stars emerge. "He said he wanted to pay for a doctor in San Francisco who specializes in scar treatment. He felt guilty that I carry these marks while he escaped without injury." "Would you want that?" Thomas asked. "Treatment, I mean." Victoria was quiet for a long time. "I do not know," she finally said. "Part of me wants to look normal again, to move through the world without people staring, but another part wonders if removing the scars would feel like erasing what happened, like pretending I did not pay a price for Daniel's life. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Thomas said. "We carry our experiences with us, whether they show on the outside or not. But, Victoria, if you decided you wanted treatment, that would not be erasing anything. It would just be choosing what you carry and how." It was the first time he had used her given name, and Victoria felt the intimacy of it ripple through her. They had been seeing each other for 3 weeks, and the careful distance she had maintained was gradually dissolving. "You can call me Victoria," she said softly, "if you want to." "Victoria," Thomas repeated, as if tasting the word. "It suits you. Victorious. Strong." "I do not feel strong," Victoria admitted. "Most of the time, I feel like I am pretending to be functional while everything inside is still broken." Thomas reached over and took her hand, her scarred left hand, which she still kept gloved in public. Broken things can heal. They might not look the same as before, but that does not mean they are less valuable. Sometimes the mended places are the strongest parts. Victoria looked down at their joined hands, his tanned fingers wrapped around her gloved ones. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked. "Surely there are women in Aurora who would be easier to court, women who do not come with so much difficulty." Because you are worth the difficulty, Thomas said simply. And because being with you does not feel difficult to me. It feels right. Victoria's breath caught. They were treading into territory that terrified her, the space where hope and fear collided. Thomas, I need you to understand something. Even if I wanted to pursue this, and I am not saying I do, I am not sure I could ever be comfortable with physical intimacy. The scars cover so much of my body. The thought of anyone seeing them fully, touching them, it makes me want to hide. Thomas was quiet for a moment, and Victoria braced for disappointment or pity. But when he spoke, his voice was gentle and firm. Victoria, if we reach a point where physical intimacy is part of our relationship, it will be because you want it and feel safe with me. Your scars would not repel me or make me want you less. If anything, I would want to honor every mark to show you that they do not diminish your worth or beauty. But we are not there yet, and we do not have to talk about it until you are ready. Tears pricked Victoria's eyes again. She seemed to cry more in the past weeks than she had in the past years, as if Thomas's presence was thawing something frozen inside her. I am not ready, she whispered. Then we wait, Thomas said. We have time. But time, as it turned out, was more complicated than either of them anticipated. 2 days later, Mr. Pearson called Victoria into his office at the back of the store. He was an older man, kind but practical, and he looked uncomfortable as Victoria entered. Sit down, Victoria, he said, gesturing to a chair. Victoria sat, anxiety tightening her chest. Had someone complained about her? Had Mr. Pearson decided she was no longer suitable to work in public? I need to tell you something, Mr. Pearson said. My daughter in Denver has been unwell. She is with child and having difficulties. Her husband wrote, asking me to come help, and I have decided to close the store for a few months while I go to her. Relief flooded through Victoria, followed immediately by concern. Of course you must go. Your family needs you. I can manage the store while you are gone. Mr. Pearson shook his head regretfully. That is the problem, Victoria. I cannot afford to keep paying wages when the store is closed, and I will need to rent out your room to bring in some income while I am away. I am so sorry, but I have to let you go. I will give you 2 weeks to find another situation. Victoria felt the floor tilt beneath her. But where will I go? What will I do? You are a good worker, Mr. Pearson said. I will write you a reference. Perhaps one of the other shopkeepers needs help, or you could find work as a housekeeper. I truly am sorry. Victoria. If circumstances were different? Victoria walked out of the office in a daze. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks to find employment and housing in a town where most people avoided her, where her appearance made her unsuitable for work that involved interaction with the public. The hotel would not hire her for the restaurant. The dress shop had made it clear years ago that her presence would upset customers. What options did that leave? That evening, when Thomas came to call, Victoria told him what had happened. She tried to keep her voice steady, but fear leaked through despite her efforts. I have some savings, she said. Enough for a few months of rent if I can find a room. But work, I do not know where to look. Thomas listened intently, his jaw tight. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Come to the Crawford Ranch. Victoria blinked. What? The ranch needs a cook and housekeeper, Thomas said. The last one left 2 months ago, and we have been making do with whoever volunteers each night. The pay is decent, and it comes with room and board. You would have your own cabin, separate from the bunkhouse. It would be proper. Thomas, I cannot. Why not? He challenged gently. You can cook, can you not? And keep house? Yes, but... And you need work and a place to live. The ranch provides both. Victoria, I know what you are thinking. You are worried about being seen as taking charity from me, or about what people might say. But this is legitimate work that needs doing, and you would be good at it. The ranch is far enough from town that you would not have to deal with stares and whispers every day. You could have some peace. Victoria's mind raced. The idea of leaving Aurora, of living somewhere isolated, was simultaneously appealing and terrifying. What would people think? An unmarried woman living at a ranch full of men? The foreman's wife lives there too, Thomas said. Mrs. Crawford. She is a good woman, very respectable. And your cabin would be near the main house, not the bunkhouse. There would be nothing improper about it. As for what people think, when has that ever been kind to you anyway? Victoria could not argue with that. I do not know, she said weakly. At least come see the place, Thomas urged. Meet Mrs. Crawford. If you hate it, we will find another solution. But Victoria, please do not let fear make you dismiss an option that could actually be good for you. The next day, Victoria rode out to the Crawford Ranch with Thomas. It was a beautiful spread in a valley with mountains rising behind it, grassland rolling toward a creek lined with cottonwoods. The main house was substantial, built of logs and stone, and the various outbuildings were well maintained. Mrs. Crawford turned out to be a woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She looked Victoria over frankly, taking in the high collar and long sleeves without comment. Thomas says you need work and are good with numbers and management, Mrs. Crawford said. Is that true? Yes, madam, Victoria replied. I have been managing the general store inventory for 2 years. Can you cook for 15 men, breakfast, lunch, and dinner? I can cook, Victoria said. I may need some practice with quantities that large, but I am a fast learner. Mrs. Crawford nodded. The cabin is small but sound. You would have privacy. The men are rough but respectful. Anyone who does not treat you proper will answer to my husband and me. The pay is $30 a month plus room and board. You would have Sundays off except for breakfast. Does that suit you? Victoria's mind reeled. $30 a month was more than she had made at the store, and she would have no expenses for housing or food. It was far more security than she had dared hope for. Yes, madam, she heard herself say. That suits me very well. Good. You can start Monday if that works. Thomas, show her the cabin. The cabin was tiny, just one room, with a bed, a small table, a wood stove, and a trunk for belongings. But it had a window overlooking the creek, and the walls were solid. To Victoria, who had been facing potential homelessness, it looked like sanctuary. What do you think? Thomas asked as they stood outside. I think I am terrified, Victoria admitted. But I also think this might be the best option I have. Thank you, Thomas, for thinking of it, for vouching for me. You do not need to thank me, Thomas said. You are doing the ranch a favor by taking the job. Mrs. Crawford has been pulling her hair out trying to manage without proper help. Victoria moved to the Crawford Ranch the following Monday. The first few days were exhausting as she learned the rhythms of ranch life meals at dawn, noon, and dusk. Quantities needed to feed hungry cowboys. The peculiarities of the massive kitchen range. But she discovered that she loved the work. There was something satisfying about the physical labor, the tangible results of bread rising and stew simmering. The ranch hands were cautious around her at first, unsure how to behave around a woman so obviously marked by trauma. But Victoria's competence won them over quickly. She learned their preferences, remembered who liked extra coffee and who avoided onions. She proved she could handle the work without complaint or drama, and always, there was Thomas. He did not treat her any differently on the ranch than he had in town, the same warmth, the same easy conversation. But now they had more time together. He helped her carry water for the kitchen in the mornings. They sat by the creek in the evenings, talking as the sun set behind the mountains. 6 weeks after Victoria arrived at the ranch, everything changed. It was a Saturday evening, and most of the hands had gone into Aurora for their weekly night off. Victoria had finished cleaning the kitchen and was sitting on the small porch of her cabin, enjoying the cool air and the sound of the creek. Thomas approached from the direction of the bunkhouse, 2 cups in hand. "Thought you might like some coffee," he said. "I made it cowboy style, so it might be strong enough to strip paint." Victoria laughed and accepted the cup. Thomas sat beside her on the step, and they drank in comfortable silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the mountains. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas said after a while. "Of course. Are you happy here, truly?" Victoria considered the question seriously. "I am happier than I have been in a long time," she said. "I feel useful. I feel less exposed than I did in town. And I like the work. Why do you ask?" "Because I need to know if you feel safe here," Thomas said. "Safe and comfortable. Because there is something I want to ask you, but only if you feel this place could be a home for you." Victoria's heart began to hammer. "What do you want to ask me?" Thomas set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. "Victoria, we have been stepping around this for weeks now, maybe since the day we met. I care for you. More than care, I am falling in love with you. Your strength, your intelligence, your resilience, the way you see the world. I want to court you properly, with the intention of marriage if you will have me." I know I am asking a lot. I know you have fears about being wanted, about physical intimacy, about whether any man could truly love you as you are, but I am here to tell you that I can and I do. If you need time, I will wait. If you need reassurance, I will give it. But Victoria, I need to know if there is any chance you might feel the same way." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. Her first instinct was to pull back, to protect herself, to list all the reasons this could not work. But she forced herself to sit with the fear, to look beyond it to what lay underneath. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am so afraid, Thomas. Afraid that you will change your mind when you truly see what the scars look like. Afraid that I will disappoint you, that I cannot be the wife you deserve. Afraid that this is too good to be real and will be taken away from me." "All of those fears are understandable," Thomas said gently. "But Victoria, fear is not the same as truth. The truth is that I have seen enough of your scars to know they do not change how I feel. The truth is that you would not disappoint me because I am not expecting you to be anything other than who you are. The truth is that I am not going anywhere unless you send me away. So I will ask you again, more simply. Do you have feelings for me? Could you imagine a future with me?" Victoria looked at him, at his honest brown eyes and his patient expression, and she let herself feel what she had been suppressing for weeks. The warmth that flooded her when he appeared, the way his voice soothed something jagged inside her, the sense of rightness she felt when they talked, as if she had found a missing piece of herself. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I have feelings for you. I think I might love you too, and it terrifies me." Thomas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back, and cupped her face with one hand. His thumb brushed her cheek, and then, deliberately, he traced the edge of the scar that climbed up her neck. Victoria froze, every instinct screaming at her to flinch away. But Thomas's touch was gentle, reverent even, and his eyes never left hers. "You are beautiful," he said softly. "Every part of you, including these, they are proof that you are brave enough to run into fire for someone you love. How could I see them as anything but remarkable?" He leaned forward slowly, telegraphing his intention, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Then, even more slowly, he kissed the scar on her neck, just above her collar. Victoria gasped, tears streaming down her face. No one had touched her scars with anything approaching tenderness. Most people avoided them entirely, as if they were contagious or obscene. But Thomas touched her as if she were precious, as if the marks that made her feel monstrous were actually beautiful. "I cannot promise this will be easy," Victoria said through tears. "I have so much fear built up, so many walls. It might take me a long time to feel comfortable with more than this." "Then we will take our time," Thomas said, pulling back to look at her. "Victoria, I am not asking for everything all at once. I am asking for the chance to show you, day by day, that you are loved exactly as you are. If it takes months or years for you to believe that, I will wait. You are worth waiting for." They sat together on the porch as the stars emerged, holding hands and talking about what courtship might look like, what they wanted from the future, how to navigate Victoria's fears and Thomas's hopes. It was the most honest conversation Victoria had ever had, and by the time Thomas finally left for the bunkhouse, she felt exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. Over the following months, Thomas proved as patient as his word. Their courtship unfolded slowly, carefully, with constant attention to Victoria's comfort. He asked permission before touching her, respected her boundaries without making her feel ashamed of them, and gradually, brick by brick, helped her dismantle the walls she had built around herself. There were setbacks. One evening, when Thomas tried to hold her hand without her glove, Victoria panicked and pulled away so violently that she knocked over her water glass. Thomas had immediately backed off, apologizing for moving too fast, but Victoria spent the night crying in her cabin, convinced she had ruined everything. The next morning, Thomas appeared at her kitchen before dawn. "I am sorry," they both said simultaneously, then stopped. "You have nothing to apologize for," Thomas said firmly. "I pushed too fast. I should have asked." "No, I overreacted," Victoria argued. "I am trying, Thomas. I truly am. But sometimes the fear just takes over, and I cannot control it." Thomas stepped closer, his expression serious. "Victoria, listen to me. You are not broken. You are not damaged. You survived something terrible, and you carry the evidence of that survival. It makes perfect sense that you would need time to trust someone with the parts of yourself that the world has taught you to hide. I am not going anywhere. When you panic, I will wait. When you need space, I will give it. When you are ready for more, I will be here. Can you trust that? Victoria nodded, tears streaming again. I am trying to trust it. Some days it is easier than others. Then we will take it one day at a time, Thomas said. No pressure, no expectations beyond what feels right to you. As summer turned to fall, Victoria found herself slowly unfurling like a flower that had been tightly closed. Thomas continued to court her with a patience and tenderness that astonished her. He brought her wildflowers from the range. He read poetry to her in the evenings. He helped with kitchen tasks without being asked, making her laugh with stories from his days on the trail. And gradually, carefully, he helped her become more comfortable with physical touch. First, holding hands without gloves. Then, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the sunset. Eventually, kisses that grew from chaste to passionate, as Victoria learned to trust that his desire for her was real and unchanging. There was an evening in late October when everything shifted. They were sitting by the creek, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. Thomas had his arm around Victoria, and she was leaning into his warmth, feeling safe and cherished. Thomas, she said quietly, I want to show you. He looked down at her, understanding immediately what she meant. Are you sure? There is no rush, Victoria. I am sure, she said, though her voice trembled. I trust you, and I need to know that when you see all of it, everything the scars cover, you will not change your mind about wanting me. I will not change my mind, Thomas said firmly. But if you need this proof, I will look and I will honor what you show me. They walked back to her cabin. Inside, with the lamp burning low, Victoria's hands shook as she reached for the buttons of her high-collared dress. Thomas stood back, giving her space, his expression patient and warm. I have never done this, Victoria whispered. No one has seen the full extent except doctors and my mother, and she is gone now. I am honored that you trust me with this, Thomas said softly. Victoria unbuttoned her dress and let it fall, standing in her chemise. The scars were visible now, tracing across her left shoulder, down her arm, across part of her chest. But that was not the worst of it. She took a shaky breath and pulled the chemise down, revealing the full map of her injuries. The scars covered her left side, from shoulder to hip, raised ridges and smooth patches, areas where the skin was tight and shiny, places where the fire had burned deep. It was a landscape of pain and survival, and Victoria felt nauseated showing it to Thomas, certain that this would be the moment he realized he could not do this after all. But Thomas stepped forward, his eyes taking in every mark, and what Victoria saw in his face was not disgust or pity. It was awe. Victoria, he breathed. My God, you must have been in such pain. It hurt for a long time, Victoria whispered, fighting the urge to cover herself. It still pulls sometimes, especially in cold weather. And it is ugly, I know. I understand if... Stop, Thomas said gently but firmly. It is not ugly. It is evidence of your courage, of what you endured. Victoria, you ran into a burning building and pulled your brother out. You survived when you should have died. These marks are proof of your strength, and I see nothing ugly in strength. He reached out slowly, his hand hovering near her scarred shoulder. May I? Victoria nodded, unable to speak. Thomas placed his hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle, and then slowly traced the path of the largest scar down her arm. His fingers were warm and careful, and he watched her face the entire time, making sure she was comfortable. Every mark tells part of your story, he said softly. The story of a woman who loved her brother enough to risk everything. A woman who survived impossible odds. A woman who built a life even when the world told her she was ruined. Victoria, these scars make you more beautiful to me, not less, because they show me who you truly are. He leaned forward and kissed her scarred shoulder, then traced kisses down her arm, following the path of the burn marks. Victoria shuddered, overwhelmed by sensation and emotion. No one had ever touched her this way, with reverence instead of pity, with desire instead of disgust. When Thomas looked up at her again, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I love you, he said. Every inch of you, marked and unmarked. I love your strength and your vulnerability, your resilience and your fear. I love who you are, Victoria, and I want to spend my life proving that to you. Victoria broke then, sobbing as years of pain and shame and fear poured out of her. Thomas held her carefully, mindful of her scars, and let her cry until she had no tears left. "I love you too," she finally whispered against his chest. "I am still afraid, but I love you, and I want to try to believe that this is real." "It is real," Thomas promised, "as real as anything in this world, and we have all the time we need to help you believe it." That night marked a turning point. Victoria began to shed the protective layers she had worn for so long, both literally and figuratively. She still wore her high collars and long sleeves in public, but in private, with Thomas, she learned to be comfortable in her own skin. They did not rush toward physical intimacy, but they moved steadily in that direction, with Thomas continuing to show her through touch and words that he found her desirable. In December, as the first snow fell on the mountains, Thomas formally proposed. He did it simply, without grand gestures, sitting in her cabin one evening after dinner. "Victoria Wright, I would be honored if you would marry me," he said, holding out a simple gold band. "I do not have much to offer, except my love and my promise that I will spend every day trying to make you happy. But if you will have me, I will be the proudest man in Colorado." Victoria looked at the ring, at Thomas's hopeful face, and felt a wave of emotion so strong it nearly knocked her over. Fear was still there, fear of the future, of whether she could be a good wife, of whether this happiness could last. But underneath the fear was something stronger: love, trust, and hope. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, Thomas Tucker, I will marry you." They married in February, a small ceremony in Aurora with only a handful of guests. Mrs. Crawford stood up with Victoria, and the Crawford foreman stood with Thomas. Victoria wore a simple dress with a high collar, and she carried a bouquet of dried flowers since nothing bloomed in winter. But to Victoria, it was the most beautiful day of her life. When Thomas said his vows, promising to love and honor her for as long as they both lived, she believed him. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Thomas kissed her gently in front of their small gathering, Victoria felt truly beautiful for the first time since the fire. The Crawfords gave them a week alone in the cabin, covering their duties so they could begin their married life in privacy. Those first days were an education for both of them, learning each other's bodies, discovering what brought pleasure, navigating Victoria's ongoing fears about her scars. There was a moment on their wedding night when Victoria froze up, suddenly overwhelmed by being completely naked with someone for the first time. Thomas had immediately stopped what he was doing and held her, telling her they could wait. They had all the time in the world, but Victoria shook her head. "No, I want this. I want you. It is hard to believe you find me attractive when all I see are the scars." Thomas sat up and lit the lamp, flooding the cabin with warm light. Then he looked at Victoria, deliberately, his gaze traveling over her body, lingering on the scarred areas. "I see a beautiful woman," he said firmly. "I see the person I love more than anything in this world. I see scars, yes, but they are part of you, and I love every part. Victoria, you need to hear this. When I look at you, I do not see damage. I see wholeness. I see someone perfect exactly as she is." He reached out and traced the largest scar across her chest, his touch gentle. "This shows me you are brave." He traced another down her arm. "This shows me you are strong." He leaned forward and kissed the scar on her neck. "This shows me you are capable of tremendous love. How could I see any of that as anything but beautiful?" Victoria felt something break open inside her, years of self-hatred cracking under the weight of Thomas's unwavering acceptance. She pulled him close, kissing him with a passion that surprised them both, and that night they truly became husband and wife in every sense. The months that followed were not without challenges. Victoria still had moments of doubt, times when she caught sight of herself in a mirror and felt the old shame resurface. But Thomas was always there, patient and loving, reminding her of her worth until she could remind herself. They continued working at the Crawford Ranch, saving money and planning for the future. Thomas spoke of eventually buying their own small spread, just enough land for some cattle and horses. Victoria dreamed of a house with a real kitchen, maybe even a garden. In May, Victoria realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be sure, then told Thomas the news one evening as they sat by the creek. "I am with child," she said, her voice a mixture of joy and fear. "We are going to have a baby. Thomas's face lit up with pure joy. He pulled her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby! Victoria, we are going to be parents." But as his initial excitement faded, Thomas must have seen the fear in Victoria's face because he pulled back, his expression becoming serious. "What is wrong? Are you not happy about this?" "I am happy," Victoria said quickly. "But Thomas, I am terrified. What if the baby is frightened by my scars? What if they grow up ashamed of having a mother who looks like I do? What if—" "Stop," Thomas said gently, taking her hands. "Our child will grow up knowing their mother is a hero. They will see your scars and learn the story of how you saved your uncle's life. They will understand that true beauty comes from courage and love, not from unmarked skin. And if anyone ever makes them feel otherwise, they will have me to answer to." Victoria leaned into him, letting his certainty shore up her own wavering confidence. "I hope you are right." "I am right," Thomas said firmly. "This child will be so loved, Victoria, by both of us, and they will be proud to call you their mother." The pregnancy was difficult. Victoria suffered terrible morning sickness for the first 4 months, and the physical changes of her body made her scars pull and ache. But Thomas was attentive and supportive, taking on extra chores so she could rest, rubbing her back when the pain was bad, talking to her belly at night and telling their unborn child stories of their parents. Mrs. Crawford proved invaluable, sharing wisdom from her own pregnancies and helping Victoria prepare for the baby's arrival. The older woman had become something like a mother figure to Victoria, and her steady presence was a comfort during the uncertain months. In late January, as the winter wind howled outside, Victoria went into labor. It was long and painful, and there were moments when Victoria was certain she could not do it, that she was not strong enough. But Thomas was there, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, telling her she was the strongest person he knew. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Victoria held him and wept. He was perfect 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair like his father. And when his tiny hand curled around her scarred finger, Victoria felt something shift inside her, a final piece of healing clicking into place. "What should we name him?" Thomas asked, his voice thick with emotion. Victoria looked at her husband, at the baby in her arms, at the life they had built together despite all her fears and doubts. "Daniel," she said, "after my brother, the boy whose life started all of this." Thomas nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Daniel Tucker, it is perfect." The next years unfolded in a rhythm of work and family. Daniel grew into a bright, active boy who followed his father everywhere and helped his mother in the kitchen as soon as he was big enough to reach the counter. When he was 3, Victoria became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. Rose inherited Victoria's intelligence and Thomas's easy nature. She was fearless from the start, climbing everything she could reach and demanding to ride horses before she could properly walk. And neither Daniel nor Rose ever showed any fear or discomfort around Victoria's scars. To them, their mother's marked skin was simply part of who she was, as normal as their father's calloused hands or their own skinned knees. There was a day when Daniel was 7 that crystallized everything for Victoria. He came home from school in Aurora, upset. And when Victoria asked what was wrong, he said that a boy had made fun of her scars. "He said you looked scary," Daniel told her, his young face angry. "I told him he was stupid and that you are beautiful and brave and the best mother in the world. Then I punched him." Victoria felt her heart clench. "Daniel, you should not have hit him." "I know," Daniel said, looking down. "Papa will probably be mad, but Mama, I could not let him say mean things about you. It was not true, and it was not fair." Victoria knelt down and pulled her son into a hug, tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much," she whispered, "and I am proud of you for defending me, even if punching was not the right choice. But Daniel, you need to know that some people will say unkind things about my scars. They do not understand, and that is their problem, not ours. You do not need to fight everyone who does not see me the way you do." "But it makes me so angry," Daniel said. "You are perfect, Mama. Why cannot everyone see that?" Thomas, who had entered during the conversation, knelt down beside them. "Your mother is perfect," he agreed. "But not everyone will see it, son. The important thing is that we do, and that we show her every day how much we love and value her. That is stronger than any punch." Daniel nodded seriously, and Victoria felt overwhelmed by gratitude for her family, for these people who loved her without reservation or hesitation. In 1890, when Daniel was 8 and Rose was 5, the Crawford Ranch went up for sale. Mr. Crawford had decided to retire, and his children had no interest in ranching. Thomas and Victoria, who had been saving diligently for years, bought a portion of the land, 200 acres with a creek running through it and a small existing house that needed work. They spent that summer renovating, turning the 2-room cabin into a proper home. Thomas built an addition for the children's bedrooms, and Victoria designed a kitchen with windows overlooking the mountains. They painted and plastered, sanded and polished, and by fall they moved into a house that was entirely theirs. Victoria planted a garden the following spring, vegetables and herbs, but also flowers. Roses for her daughter, sunflowers because they were cheerful, wildflowers from the range. She worked with her sleeves rolled up, no longer worried about who might see her scars. The children played nearby, their laughter floating on the breeze, and Thomas worked in the barn, building up their small herd of cattle. There were hard times, of course. A drought one year that killed half their herd. A terrible winter when they nearly lost everything. Rose caught pneumonia at age 7, and Victoria spent 3 days sitting by her bedside, praying and bargaining with God for her daughter's life. But they survived each challenge, their love for each other providing a foundation that could weather any storm. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Victoria back to the creek where they had courted, where he had first told her he loved her. They sat on the bank, watching the water flow past, their hands intertwined. "Do you remember when you told me you did not think any man could want you?" Thomas asked. Victoria smiled. "I remember. I was so certain of it. So afraid." "Are you still afraid?" Thomas asked. Victoria considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted, "old fears do not disappear completely, but they do not control me anymore. You taught me that I am worthy of love, Thomas. You and our children showed me that the scars do not define me. They are just part of my story." Thomas lifted her hand and kissed her scarred knuckles. "They are part of a beautiful story," he said. "The story of the bravest woman I know, who saved her brother, who survived when she should have died, who learned to love again despite believing it was impossible. I am honored to be part of that story, Victoria." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of the sun and the contentment that came from a life well lived. "I love you," she said simply. "Thank you for not giving up on me when I wanted to give up on myself." "Never," Thomas promised. "Not then, not now, not ever." As the years continued to pass, the Tucker Ranch prospered. Daniel grew into a fine young man who shared his father's way with horses and his mother's head for business. Rose became a teacher, opening a small school on their property for the scattered ranch families in the area. They both married well, choosing partners who loved and respected them, who had been raised to see beyond surface appearances to the character beneath. Victoria became a grandmother at 42, when Daniel and his wife had twins, a boy and a girl. Holding those babies, seeing her son's joy and pride, Victoria felt the final echoes of her old shame disappear. She had built this a family, a home, a life filled with love. The scars that had once made her feel like she could never have these things were simply part of the tapestry of her existence, neither more nor less important than any other thread. There was a day, years later, when a young woman came to the ranch. She was perhaps 20, with burn scars covering one side of her face and neck. She had heard about Victoria from someone in Aurora, heard that there was a woman who had survived a fire and built a good life despite her injuries. Victoria invited her in, made tea, and listened as the young woman, her name was Sarah, poured out her story. A kitchen fire 2 years ago, a broken engagement, a sense of being permanently damaged and unlovable. "I heard that you are married," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that you have children and grandchildren. I do not see how that is possible. Who could love someone who looks like us?" Victoria reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. "I used to believe exactly what you believe," she said. "I was certain that my scars made me unworthy of love or happiness. I hid from the world for years, convinced I was doing everyone a favor by keeping myself separate." "What changed?" Sarah asked. "I met a man who saw past the scars to who I really was," Victoria said. "But more importantly, he helped me see past them too. Sarah, your scars are not the sum total of who you are. They are evidence that you survived something difficult, but they do not define your worth or your future. The right person will love you not despite your scars, but because they are part of your story, part of what makes you who you are. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. But how do I believe that? How do I trust it? One day at a time, Victoria said gently. You start by choosing to believe that you deserve love and happiness. Then you take small steps toward living as if that is true. You stop hiding. You engage with the world. You let people see you, really see you, and you trust that some of them will recognize your worth. They talked for hours, and when Sarah finally left, Victoria felt as if she had passed on something precious, the hard-won knowledge that survival is not just about living through trauma, but about learning to thrive in spite of it. That evening, Victoria stood on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and orange. Thomas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. You are thinking deep thoughts, he observed. I am thinking about how far I have come, Victoria said. That young woman today, Sarah, she reminded me of who I used to be, so certain that the scars made me unlovable, so afraid to hope for anything better. You were never unlovable, Thomas said firmly. You just did not know your own worth yet. You taught me, Victoria said, turning in his arms to face him. You saw me when I could not see myself. You loved me when I could not love myself. You traced every scar and showed me they were not flaws, but proof of strength. Thomas, you saved my life just as surely as I saved Daniel's that night. Thomas cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the familiar paths of her scars. We saved each other, he said. I was drifting before I met you, Victoria, never staying anywhere long, never letting myself hope for more than the next job. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. We built this life together. Victoria kissed him, pouring 30 years of love and gratitude into the gesture. When they pulled apart, she smiled. I am glad you walked into that general store all those years ago. I am glad you saw something in me worth pursuing. I am glad you gave me a chance, Thomas replied. I am glad you trusted me enough to let me prove that your scars never made you less. They only made you more remarkable. They stood together as the sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across the land they had built a life on. Inside the house, they could hear Rose helping her mother prepare dinner, Daniel's laughter as he played with his children, the sounds of family, of home, of a life Victoria had once believed impossible. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Victoria thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the burning house that scarred her body, through the years of isolation and self-hatred, to the moment Thomas Tucker walked into her life and showed her that love sees deeper than skin. She thought about the family they had raised, the ranch they had built, the love they had sustained through challenges and triumphs alike. The scars were still there, of course. They would always be there, a permanent reminder of the night that changed her life. But they no longer filled her with shame or fear. Instead, they were simply part of her story. The story of a woman who survived, who loved, who learned that true beauty comes not from an unmarked surface, but from the courage to live fully, despite the marks we carry. Thomas took her hand, his scarred fingers intertwining with hers, and together they walked back into their home, into the warmth and light and love that they had built together. Victoria paused in the doorway, looking back at the stars emerging over the mountains, and felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She had believed no man could want a woman with scars, but Thomas had traced each one and loved her more, and in doing so, he had taught her the most important lesson of all, that love, true love, sees the whole person, the pain and the joy, the scars and the strength, the fear and the courage, and chooses to cherish all of it. That was the legacy she would pass on to her children and grandchildren, to young women like Sarah who needed to hear it. That survival is beautiful, that scars are proof of strength, that love is possible even when it seems impossible. That home is not a place without pain, but a place where pain is met with compassion, where wounds are allowed to heal, where every part of who we are is welcomed and cherished. As Victoria crossed the threshold into her home, surrounded by the people who loved her, she smiled. The fire had taken much from her all those years ago, but it had also led her here to this life, this love, this profound and abiding happiness. And she would not trade that for anything, not even unmarked skin. The story of Victoria Wright Tucker was not about overcoming her scars or moving past them. It was about integrating them into a life fully lived, about finding someone who loved her not despite her wounds, but because they were part of what made her extraordinary. It was about the transformative power of acceptance, both from others and, perhaps most importantly, from herself. Years later, when Victoria was old and her children had children of their own, she would sit on that same porch and tell her grandchildren the story of the fire, of the scars, of the cowboy who taught her that she was lovable exactly as she was. And they would listen with wide eyes, not because the story was tragic, but because it was beautiful, a testament to resilience, to love, to the incredible strength of the human spirit. "Did Papa really trace all your scars?" Victoria's granddaughter asked one day. Victoria smiled, remembering that first time she had shown Thomas the full extent of her injuries, how he had touched each mark with reverence rather than revulsion. "He did," she confirmed, "every single one. And he showed me that they were not something to be ashamed of, but something to honor. They proved I was brave enough to run into fire for someone I loved, strong enough to survive what should have killed me, and resilient enough to build a beautiful life even when I thought such a thing was impossible." "I think that is the most romantic story I have ever heard," the girl said dreamily. "It is my story," Victoria said simply, "and every word of it is true. Remember that, sweetheart, when life marks you in ways you did not expect. The marks do not diminish you. They are proof that you survived, and survival is always beautiful." As the sun set on another day at the Tucker Ranch, Victoria looked around at the life she had built. The family gathered for dinner, the land they had cultivated and cared for, the home filled with laughter and love. She thought about the young woman she had been, so certain that her scars made her unworthy of happiness, and she wished she could go back and tell that frightened girl that everything would be all right, that love would find her, that she would learn to see herself through kinder eyes, that her story would have a happy ending after all. But time only moved forward, and perhaps that was as it should be. The journey from fear to love, from shame to acceptance, from isolation to belonging, that journey had shaped her just as surely as the fire had, and she would not trade it, not for anything. Thomas came out onto the porch, moving a bit more slowly now that they were both in their 60s, and sat beside her. He took her hand, still scarred, still strong, and kissed it gently. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Victoria said. "How blessed. I believed I was unlovable, and you proved me wrong every single day for over 30 years. 40 years next February," Thomas corrected with a smile. "And Victoria, you were never unlovable. You just needed someone patient enough to help you see what was always true, that you are extraordinary, scars and all." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the weight of his love and the lightness of finally, truly believing in her own worth. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For seeing me when I could not see myself. For loving me when I could not love myself. For building this beautiful life with me." "Thank you for letting me," Thomas replied. "For taking a chance on a wandering cowboy who promised to love you exactly as you are. For giving me a home and a family, and a love that has sustained me through everything. Victoria, you are the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat together as the stars emerged, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life on the foundation of acceptance and love. The scars were still there, but they no longer defined Victoria's story. Instead, they were simply part of it, evidence of pain survived, of courage demonstrated, of a life lived fully and without apology. And as the night settled over the Tucker Ranch, Victoria Wright Tucker closed her eyes and felt, for perhaps the 1,000th time, but with no less wonder than the first, the profound truth that had transformed her life. She was loved, completely and unconditionally, exactly as she was. The cowboy had traced each scar and loved her more, and in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift of all, the ability to love herself. That was the true happy ending, Victoria thought, as she drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms. Not that the scars disappeared, or that the past was erased, but that she had learned to carry both with grace and gratitude. She had believed no man could want a woman with scars, but Thomas had proven that the right man would see beyond the scars to the extraordinary woman beneath. And together, they had built something beautiful, a love that lasted, a family that thrived, a home that welcomed everyone exactly as they were. The story ended not with perfection, but with peace, not with the erasure of pain, but with its integration into a life fully lived. And that, Victoria knew, was the best ending any story could have.